Welcome to Bay Area Psychology. Tonight's focus on critical incident debriefing is all the more timely in the wake of the devastating Marin fires and last week's double slaying at Browning Ferris Industries. On October 6th, Mercury News ran an article stating, prompted by a mild rebuke the day before, an accountant at the San Jose branch of a waste disposal company shot and killed his supervisor before taking his own life. The article goes on to state that the company had planned to have counselors available Monday to help employees cope with the trauma. Research shows that with few exceptions, people exposed to plane crashes, violence, fires, natural disasters, or other terrifying experiences show shock reactions. The symptoms may vary greatly depending on the nature and severity of the terrifying experience, the degree of surprise, and the personality of the individual. What seems to be true across the board is that early intervention by specially trained counselors will often alleviate longer-term symptoms which might otherwise develop into what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. We are fortunate to have with us Janet Childs from the Center for Living with Dying. She's a returning guest, and Deputy Chief Robert Margolis from the Santa Clara Fire Department. Thank you for joining me, both of you.
Thank you.
I had mentioned that it's impossible when you're in the midst of a trauma to not be touched in some way, but that there were, apparently it's not the same response that everybody might experience as a result. I wondered if you have found that to be true in your work.
Well, in the fire service, I think that's true, and to some degree, the training and the repetitive incidents steel you against it, and you learn to block certain things out. But even with that blocking technique, the cumulative effect of the incidents, and in some cases a specific incident, if there is a maybe a victim of a certain age group or of a certain infirmity or a certain type of incident that has some relationship to the rescue workers somewhere in their personal life. Okay. Perhaps a child trapped when they have a child of the same age, and those sorts of things can severely impact. And the fire service, I think, really started recognizing this after the San Diego air crash. They lost a significant number of emergency workers to emotional disorders and stress who retired out. That was shortly followed by the Cerritos crash, where they did crisis intervention right on the scene, and the significance was obvious. There was only one emergency worker left the emergency services after that incident.
So you could really see a key difference in the early intervention.
Absolutely.
Has that been your experience, Janet?
Absolutely, and especially not only for the victims and the survivors of a critical incident, but also for the emergency responders on the front lines. What we found is that many times what happens is that in the aftermath, what occurs is that for emergency responders, many times they will have a delayed reaction because they will be handling the incident as other people are reacting to it. And we really saw this after the 1989 quake here in our county. People that were working on the front lines to help victims and survivors did fine in the first few days, first few weeks, but then had a delayed response, which triggered what Bob referred to as a cumulative stress response, which is where one incident triggers or reminds us of past incidents that we've been involved with. And I think emergency responders are especially, vulnerable to this because they deal with repetitive or situations that may bring this up on a more, more often.
Yeah, more regular basis.
Well,
right. And it seems to me that your point about it reflecting personal history is well taken. Mm-hmm. Which is why it may catch people off guard in that they think, well, I've responded to dozens of fires. Why this particular time is this so difficult for me? And it's helpful to have somebody maybe point out that link and go, well, but this is a little different.
Well, that thought process is accurate, but one of the things we were dealing with in the fire service, and I think that the police agencies had the same thing, was the, for lack of a better term, a macho image that you're not supposed to hurt, you're not supposed to feel this pain, you're not supposed to cry, and those kinds of things. And I know when we implemented this procedure in our own department, we made it a mandatory attendance, and we virtually had to order people to go to these sessions. Within, I would say, a year to 18 months after that, we were getting phone calls soliciting these sessions. So they recognize the need, and now that they know it's okay and that their brothers and sisters in the emergency service feel the same way, there's more acceptance.
More, it sounds like a more internal permission to go ahead and utilize these resources. And I would guess, and I don't know, but I would guess that part of the fear that may come up is, gee, you know, if I allow myself to talk about this, it's going to open the floodgates for me, and then I'm going to stay sensitive. Whereas if I'm unaware of it and I, you know, sit on it, somehow I'll be blocked out, and maybe that does reflect the macho thing you're talking about.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the individuals have to understand that CISD does not make the problem go away. It doesn't make it better. It's not medicine in the sense that it cures the cold. It rather makes the person aware and gives permission for that feeling. And then they still have to deal with the problem and the hurt and the pain and those kinds of things. But what they understand is that they're not the only one that feels that way.
So it's very important to have that connection with other people experiencing the same thing.
Exactly, and that's why it's very important to when you have critical incident stress management, you want to support the victims and the survivors, but you also want to support the emergency responders in a separate way so that they feel safe to be able to talk about their feelings. And it's important, there's a different process that's used for each of those situations, because we need to be with people that are like us, that do what we do, so that we have a sense of camaraderie and also have a sense of normalcy. And what Bob was talking about, I think, is so important. The hardest thing about dealing with post-trauma stress is the ensuing isolation and feeling like, what's wrong with me? I feel like I'm going crazy. I'm out of control. I did fine during the incident. How come I'm falling apart now? So to normalize that and to educate people that there are some positive ways you can deal with it. And one of the most effective ways is getting together, talking it out, understanding that you're normal, and dealing with it in a positive way together rather than having to deal with it by yourself.
In isolation. We've prepared a graphic, and let's begin to talk about what happens emotionally for people.
Great.
Our first graphic, and this is taken from a book called Ticking Bombs by Michael Mantell. And the major focus of his particular book was on violence in the workplace, but I felt that this was applicable. Stage one in the aftermath would be that sense of shock or disbelief or denial. He refers to the walking wounded, or people saying, I can't believe that I saw what I saw. And in your experience, when you go out into sites, do you hear that? Do people say, I just don't believe I saw that?
Oh, yeah.
That happens a lot.
Okay.
We had a situation in our department, in fact, Janet was deeply involved in it. I don't know, I guess it's been a couple of years. We had a suicide murder situation that involved one of our members. And we wound up debriefing the entire department. And I think that was a critical move on our part to do that. And I'm glad that we had the guidance to do it. But we had a lot of walking wounded. People were walking around, I can't believe it, you know, I just went golfing with this individual, or we just went fishing or whatever, and I thought things were getting better, so forth and so on. And there is a great deal of disbelief, great deal.
One of the things that happens too, I was just returning from an incident, in fact, to come here today, where again people, you talked about walking and talking. One of the things in the stress response that sometimes we need to do immediately is to move. It's like a way to almost like immediately, you know, get some of that stress out in a physical way. And I was walking with some of the people in the aftermath of the critical incident and talking, and one of the things they kept saying is, I can't believe it. How could this happen? You know, it's unbelievable. And then they would flip back into, my God, this really did happen. So they'd flip back and forth from reality to, no, I can't believe it. So it's a flipping in and out. And I think that's what's so difficult, is it's like this roller coaster. So you're flipping in and out of reality. And it's very difficult because you can feel like I'm handling it, I've got it together, and then you hit one of those landmines, as we call them, one of those memory triggers that remind you, and it's all of a sudden you're flooded with the feelings and the reactions, which are sometimes out of our cognitive control.
Well, and part of what you're talking about reminds me with people I have worked with, because I've done some of this work myself, is that sense of the importance of having our denial at first.
Yes.
You know, that the usefulness of not being able to recognize it, because we can't, as people, take it all in at one time.
Exactly.
It's just too much for us. So, you know, it's differentiating. yes, you know, normalizing the denial. And I guess I would ask the two of you, in your experience, when is the denial become a problem? I mean, we need it at first. In your experience, how do we know it's becoming a problem, that we're stuck there?
Well, I think the fact that there is denial is one of the reasons that you can't allow people the option of going to CISD.
Okay.
I think you have to make it mandatory. We make it mandatory attendance, but not mandatory participation.
Okay.
Because there's a sense that they will gain from hearing the other people express their feelings, even if they choose not to verbalize, and that's okay. Yeah. We try to do initial defusing, depending on the incident, any time from before the units leave the incident scene to within the 24 hours.
Okay.
And then we will come back for a more extensive debriefing, actually, within 72 hours or so. Okay. We want to, the initial one is to just put the signal out there. It's okay, you're going to feel this way. These are the things you need to watch out for. Okay. This is what you're going to sense, you know, when you're home with your family. You may have these problems, and we are going to get back together on this.
So again, it comes back to the normalizing.
Exactly.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment because we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'd like to hear more about how the two of you formed the unit here in this area. Stay with us. We'll learn more about intervention during trauma. Welcome back. When we left, I had asked you briefly about how the two of you came together and formed what feels to me to be a pretty enlightened group.
Well, it actually started a long time ago, and when Mary Ann and Janet and some of the other pioneers were starting out with the center, they came to the fire department and wanted some emergency workers to talk about how we just dealt with grief. This was really before CISD ever became vogue, and I happened to be the one she talked to, and we chatted and we talked about the importance of maybe developing a training video and so forth and so on, and I spoke at a couple of sessions, and it sort of evolved, and then Dr.